anytime we're working intimately with people and they're having problems, we have to recognize that, those are, 90% of the time auto responses, trauma responses versus being mentally ill. And that's something I'd like to talk about today. I think it's super important that, being in integrity ourselves and recognizing that we have to be trauma informed if we're going to help people. Quantum therapeutics outlook on trauma is different, right? Because we really believe in potential. And, the basis of this is, not everybody that experiences stuff in their lives get PTSD, but the ones that do are really brilliant people.
Yeah.
And those tangled up in, quote, mental illness are really brilliant people. And, it's important for us to recognize that, the spiritual gifts, the psychic abilities, the shamanic, structures, those overlap with mental illness quite readily. So that's kind of what we're going to look at today as we move forward. Yeah, space. Yeah. Okay. So we have to think about, firstly, most of these people are empaths.
Empaths. Yeah. Okay.
And when we think about that and we think about them being empaths, then we're like, okay, well, that level of being an empath, we have to begin to, let me get going here. We have to begin to, I'm going to give them a second. We have to begin when we're looking at somebody, operating from that place of being a detective and recognizing, how their gifts fall into their trauma responses, right? Because oftentimes a person may be highly sensitive empath anyway, right? And, what, outside of their trauma, right? So in being able to break that apart for them starts giving them some authority, and it gives them the opportunity to start breaking apart and recognizing what they're doing naturally and how cool it is. And then they can start taking ownership. Here's it. So we were kind of speaking to the idea of an empath, the highly sensitive, and trauma, and recognizing how much is a person's natural being and how much is the trauma. And within this space, we have to teach them how to navigate the world as a highly sensitive empath and not suffer, right? Because we have to recognize that an empath is the highest of all abilities. And empath is the combination of everything. As we start breaking the concepts of quantum therapeutics apart and really move into the depths of, the trauma responses, right? I think it's important for us to recognize that that person being an empath and highly sensitive, our world has them suffering, right? Because we're guided right into emotion. So, when we can recognize and they can start recognizing that, their system is evolved enough to be able to take in that much information. Now, the trauma has halted, right, some of those pathways, right? So there's a lot of congested energy, like rolling around these people, right? Because their brain needs an upgrade, right? Their systems need an upgrade. So I have been working really hard to bring quantum therapeutics into the mainstream. It rivals EMDR. EMDR's claim is to dismantle or disarm a traumatic event, that they can do that in 3 to 12 sessions. We can do that in an hour. That is the power of this process. So, in that, We have to be very clear of the depth of trauma. Now, trauma happens in a spectrum. You know, where we are on that spectrum and being objective in that is important, right? Helping people to understand where they are on that spectrum is important, because if somebody is equating getting scolded, right, with the word devastation, that's a hard hole to climb out of. Breaking down how they're using their words and everything is very important. So quantum therapeutics was truly birthed out of my personal necessity, right? I had been pretty much left on every level of my existence. Everybody had given up on me. They wanted me to go on disability. You know, I was drugged. I was on 11 prescriptions. And finally, a very kind doctor, right, was kind enough to tell me that my body was in an absolute distress and there was no reason why. But stress kills people every day. So that, coupled with my psychiatrist saying you're not in there and I don't know how to help you, right, were the two backbone thoughts that took me around the world and back. So if I'm not in there, where am I? And if my body is dying and no one knows why, right, what needs to change? In my studies with Deepak Chopra, right, that was probably my first action. I went home and threw all my pills in the trash and was like, okay, what next? And through my studies with Deepak Chopra, I almost stepped into a place of feeling like a fraud simply because my knowledge was not affecting my being triggered and my auto responses. In that base of knowledge, he took a personal interest in me and started teaching me personally. And, you know, he recognized what I was doing naturally, that dissociation and astral travel, that action is the same if we are choosing to do it. Well, not even, it is the same. It's just causing problems when it's on autoresponder, right? Because when you think of fight flight, the most drastic form with that was that you're just completely exiting your body and leaving your body. You're not even taking it with you. Quantum therapeutics truly is a revised form of talk therapy. That's really important. We did not throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is an all-encompassing process. Yeah, the magic part is amazing, and the rest is important as well. We work with behaviors. That is a huge system that we have to write. You know, we can't say a person went through all this trauma and they're going to behave as if it didn't happen. Their responses, their behaviors, their programming, right? We're looking at all of those systems at the same time. Often people think, okay, let's go in, let's zap the magic, and suddenly life's going to be different. And that is not true. It takes that conscious awareness. So what's amazing is as they're coming through the quantum therapeutics process, they are walking into awareness. They're walking into authority. We're walking them through the eye of the needle and into the world and not of it. That's where we're headed, where they're in complete authority, being able to stand in the eye of the needle or the eye of the hurricane and understand how to filter the information of the world, right? So we're also, you know, when they're in those jumps, that's a deep immersion into that moment from the space of an adult, right? We're not going into the child. Hypnotherapy often takes you into the child. This is different than that. Right. So, and you're in that hypno class, just recognize the distinctions as you're in that process. And again, like we said, EMDR claims, to dismantle a trauma in 3 to 12 sessions. And our claim is give us an hour. And the unique points of quantum therapeutics is the quantum jumping and the reclamation of these amazing honed gifts right, that people have acquired through their different lifetimes. If a person is in front of us, they're probably an empath, which means they're kind of on their final journey through this plane. So that means they have the ability, if they hadn't been beaten up, they have the ability to hold that much power here on earth. That's amazing. That's being able to not float out and go to the power. That's being able to pull that power down to this planet and be a superhero. Yeah. So again, this our claim when we're really working for them to gain understanding of themselves with a capital S throughout all 5 systems. So we're teaching at the same time as we're creating reclamation. And truly that's what it is. It is a reclamation of their systems, reclamation of their brain, a reclamation of their power. Our brain we should be able to use our brain to think like our computer. We shouldn't be thought by our brain. That is a distinction. And as we're moving through, we're working to clean out that default system in these jumps so that that can be true for a person. And another humongous piece is walking them into a state of personal responsibility and out of blame. If we're in blame, we're not taking responsibility for our part in the situation. Now, as a child, fair enough. But as an adult, we have to recognize and realize that our behaviors and our words are out of integrity. If we're in integrity, then we can take responsibility of our words, our behaviors, and, how we're interacting with people. And we very readily see the body begin to right itself without us having to be focused on their bodies. Like the lady that just left was in extraordinary pain, and she's been gone and made a road trip across the country and is still in alignment because she's in integrity. We're also really operating from that space of a mirror and recognizing what foods they're eating, what foods they need to be eating to create resolution and harmony throughout the chakra system. Right now, we're going to get into that. But like feeding the chakras is really important. Often we're working within the lower 2 chakras, really deep if they have childhood trauma, right? And those lower 2 chakras, we want to feed the root vegetables, right? We want to feed that change. So that is beets, onions, right? If we're really working in the root chakra, those red vegetables like beets are just super magical, right? All the different colors, the carrots, garlic, onions, ginger, those root vegetables are going to give support to us creating harmony within those lower chakras. And, and again, we're really looking at those mental systems too, and how evolved they are, because some of those mental systems are truly operating from a childlike space, right? Often when you're interacting with people, if you start looking from that perspective, you're like, okay, I'm dealing with a 13-year-old child right now in this space or fragment that's in control. It's important as well, like often the genius people are in the space of black sheep of the family, because not everyone that lived in that house ends up in the quantum entanglement that has created the C-PTSD and PTSD. There becomes conflict around that, and the word crazy or mental illness starts wrapping around this person, right? Because they're different, and they are different. Let's celebrate that. That should not be a problem. In most cultures, it would not be a problem. It would be exalted. As we started breaking this apart and really diving into, okay, what are the quantum actions? Dissociation became foundational through this evolution of this process. Dissociation, just by definition, is the separation of one thing from the other. It's not an idea. It's real and literal and true. And the separation is the astral body from the physical body. And if we start taking these things out of the idea column, as we were talking about last week, Shirley, we start recognizing that, you know, on many levels, that is a superpower that people work years to be able to acquire, right? There are whole like associations around people who have had out-of-body experiences. And I step into conversation with them and bring the idea that, okay, is dissociation the same thing as an out-of-body experience? And why is that so special to you when that happens every day for these folks over here at will? What a superpower that is. So an out-of-body experience is your astral body leaving your spiritual body. So when I start seeing the spiritual words, the quantum words, and the traditional words starting to overlap, right? We start to notice that there's a moment of truth there. There's something everyone's noticing, but what's the action? So the quantum action 2 would be the fragmentation. So this little dude leaves his body because he's scared to death of what is happening to his body at that moment. So he's brilliant enough to like run away from his body. And what happens next? The astral body would have to fragment, firstly, for this physical body to not be dead. So he was intelligent enough to leave enough astral body for this body to still be fighting. That's brilliant in of itself, that he can walk, talk. He's not in a trance like Edward Casey. He's not dead. He can still walk, talk, and fight and be out at the same time. I have memories of watching my body struggle from above. I have memories of that. And a lot of people do, right? So, you know, is that any different than if a person was in a coma and could tell you how many people came and who came and when they came? No. Again, an out-of-body experience. Or a person that has a near-death experience and can talk about like the surgeons and the surgery and what music they had playing. It's no different. When we recognize that, that is a superpower. Quantum action, we have to, the astral body, yeah, we've talked about that. Now, that fragmentation is molecular, and we have to recognize that as well. The astral body has molecules. So if it has molecules and it's leaving enough life force for this body to fight and moving out here, we have to realize that, you know, those molecules are real. Even air has molecules. When we talk about that fragmentation, that derealization, that depersonalization, ADD, feeling empty, alone, and separate, that's real and true. Does that make sense? Because these fragments end up having a life of their own, almost like a hologram. They're alive and real, right? So when you're doing that inner body work, we have to realize that when we go back to talk to these fragments, like they're operating from a space of fear and awareness, and just as if a child in that time and space. You know, I took a ton of like astral and energy classes, and the idea of the astral body was an idea, and an idea can't fragment, right? An idea doesn't keep our life going, right? An idea, unless it's put into action, means nothing. So what is a time loop? Einstein tells us that with a force strong enough and pure enough, time can fold back in upon itself. So this little dude is out he's fragmented, he's gotten out. He can fold time because he's like a little wizard, right? And he's afraid and he's run away. And it's like, okay, what would be my action rather than like, let's make a cyst. Let's close this piece of time off from my conscious reality so that I can get up and have breakfast tomorrow with these people. Now, what's real and true is there's probably no force strong enough or big enough than a little childlike wizard, right? Or this little magical being that somebody is abusing. So he gets out of his body. He looks down. He was like, oh my God, what am I going to do about that? How do I get up and have breakfast with this person and pretend like he's my daddy now? How brilliant. I'm going to close this moment off from my conscious awareness so that I can be a child. I had people asking me, and I would go back to my bedroom with the conscious thought that I needed to keep that memory loop open. It would close with a pop, just like if you were closing a loop, right? Or a dream, like if you're walking to the bathroom and that you're trying to hang on to that reality moment and you hear that pop, it's kind of the same. It's exactly the same feeling. Is that the same concept as amnesia? Absolutely. Because that is removing that from this person, just like a cyst. If you're, what is our body? How brilliant is that to say, okay, I have a localized infection. I'm going to put a bubble around it so it doesn't contaminate everything and it can get attention. Same thing, right? Same exact concept on our timeline. It's brilliant and it's mastery level actions. And within time, it creates patterns that leave us very vulnerable because we don't have access to that information. Now, what's also interesting is that when we are triggered and one of those fat fragments is operating, they don't have access to our adult information. Hence those, quote, personalities or that individualization of those fragments. They only know what they know up to the moment that that loop was created. Reality hopping, that little dude, and you know, in his brilliance, science says that we're given like 6, how do they know, right? But like these tendril timelines out in front of us with choice. So this brilliant kid is looking down and he's like, well, maybe I'll hop over a few frames and come down to where that moment is not so dire. So that's something that happens to them too, is that reality hopping is the ability to hop over into one of those alternate realities and take over. Just like amnesia, it's like you know people, but you don't know them. So that derealization and depersonalization is also a very literal phenomenon because you don't really know them. People that feel like they're in the wrong place, they are, right? So as we start bringing them into 2022 and that timeline starts having a trajectory and a taproot almost, that oneness and that ability to say, okay, yeah, I am here. Those relationships and that ability to start belonging happens, but it happens first within self. One of the things that I found extraordinarily frustrating as I was trying to heal is that I just wanted somebody so desperately to see me all at one time. You know, we operate within 5 major systems: physically, mentally, behaviorally, energetically, and spiritually, right? And I want to make the distinction that emotionally is not on here. Our emotional system is an energetic system, right? Our mental processes are more important, right? Because that emotional energy dissipates as we come into integrity. So as we're operating as a practitioner, we are tracking through all 5 of those systems at one time. So this is the opportunity to let your gifts blaze and be that detective that you are. So in the physical system, right, we have to recognize that this physical body has systems within this major system. So we're calling from the get-go integrity in their physical system. Integrity being harmony, being working in sync, right? Working as one. I love the Course of Miracles, talked about each cell in the body being able to go off and live on its own and create another whole new body if it wanted to. But they're all choosing to work in harmony and unison for our body to operate. Cellularly, we are calling in balance and harmony and unity, where everybody's operating in the highest and best of the one. Now, when people are telling their stories, right, about their physical bodies, whatever, we work to remove the labels and move into childlike words. The more we can get them to use childlike words, child's use nouns and verbs. Their trauma is lodged within those lower systems. Their fragments are always younger. You're not going to have an older fragment unless you're working in other lifetimes. But in that first 90 days, we're working in this lifetime, right? So we're really working, and using their body as a way to track, right? And how they describe their pain often is the language that the child would be using in their situation. So as we're tracking, we want them to use words that are going to create pictures. Word spells are seen in those pictures. They're in flowery grown-up words. They're not saying anything. Most of us are empaths as well. So as we're walking through this mastery for yourself, you're able to teach that to them. But being able to mirror what their body is doing can be very beneficial once that's really honed for you. Right now, mirroring is different than owning it, and that becomes a distinction for you. Like for myself, if I'm working with somebody and if I say a word to them and I suddenly feel pain in my stomach, I'm going to say, did that make your stomach hurt? And as I do that, it moves from my body to them, right? And the faster I do that, the less my body becomes it. Does that make sense? So the faster I can turn that around, or the faster you can turn it around, the faster it leaves you, just like a mirror. Does that make sense? At this point, especially in the beginning, right? I mean, always, but we're really focused in the beginning with food as medicine. Often people come in with their guts hurting, right? Which has many, many revelations throughout all 5 systems. Often their wisdom circuit is unplugged, and that helps as well. But we're really, again, feeding those lower chakras. Often I get them to make like an old-fashioned grandma soup, and the recipe's in there to make this, in the hub that you can share out to make this soup. But that very love-filled, nourished root vegetable chicken soup can do wonders as far as creating balance in the stomach. That was no joke. So throughout their journey with us, right, we are really monitoring, right, their symptoms in comparison with their diagnosis. Those symptoms begin to fall away, and then we have to, pry the diagnosis away from them. Sometimes they like to hang on to those. As far as tracking in their body, follow the heat, right? If there's heat, there's inflammation. If there's inflammation, there is a clog in the system. If there's a clog in their body, that means there's a glitch in time somewhere, right? And our body's natural response to the heat is water, which is the inflammation, right? So as we can release these loops, the water can put out the heat, and boom, that can dissipate very quickly. Now, in their mental process, we're really from the get-go tapping into how their mind works, how they have logged words away. Because sometimes people with trauma, it's interesting, the words that are really make them defensive, right? For me, relationships was really a word that made me, or like for somebody to say to me, I'd like to explore your body's relationship with food. I wanted to punch their eyeballs out, right? Rather than saying, how are you able to eat? Like, how is your digestion, right? Is your body able to process food, right? How do you feel after you eat? But that relationship word, when somebody would say that to me, I'd instantly be like, so we have to just recognize, right? There's also go-to phrases and go-to words that, often people's emotional intelligence is very small in the beginning because their fragments are in charge of the emotion. Say every emotional response is anger. So we have to break that anger down. And were you really angry, or were you disappointed? Right? Did that make you sad? Right? Or did you come out fighting because you felt sad? We have to break that down. Or another one is hurt, right? And, often I'll tell them, like, that's not an emotional response, that's a physical response. So your emotions can't really be hurt. So tell me another word with what you're experiencing. Do you feel disrespected? Do you feel violated by these words, right? What are you actually feeling? Now, and I'm always kind of adding to it, but there's an emotional response list in the hub that's important to play with too, right? And for yourself, like, to really go, okay, like that word devastated. To me, like that is a word that's relegated to earthquake victims or something, where on all layers their life has crumbled, right? Or a person that had a terrible car accident and suddenly their life has crumbled, right? Devastation, is not equivalent to getting scolded. Getting scolded, you might be embarrassed, right? You might be upset. You might feel defensive. You're not going to be devastated, because if that's true, your inner resilience is a problem, right? And that inner resilience is what keeps us standing through life. Through this is also a transition away from those traditional medical and mental illness words. If we can start recognizing the crossover, and they start recognizing the crossover, we can start breaking down some of those barriers, right? Now, behaviorally, and God love us, we try so hard, but we have to understand that if your computer has a virus, it may be trying really hard to operate right and find the right avenues to give you what you want. But if it's viral, it's viral, right? If your body has a virus, you're not going to be operating at your optimum, right? And if we have faulty programs in our brain, our words and our behaviors are going to be received differently than we intend them, right? Often I'll be in session with people and, I'll be like, okay, tell me exactly what they said right now. Or tell me exactly what happened. And in the end, like, their perception is often very faulty, and how they showed up in that situation, right, is not what they intended, right? Because they're out of integrity. They're not trustworthy, right? We're not trustworthy if what we're saying and what we're thinking and what we're doing are all different, right? So that's our goal with them. We're really working to upgrade their words, right? And pull them into it, but in understanding of how they're impacting the situation, that personal responsibility. Like I've got a young woman who's got, has been diagnosed with OCD, and God love her, she asks people questions to the point where, like, people are uncomfortable. And, so we break that down. I was like, okay, well, so and so got uncomfortable because you're asking about their bathroom habits, and that's none of your business, right? That's none of your business. That is a behavior that needs to change for her to be received, right? Now, energetically, most people don't even know about their energetic systems. They don't even know they have energetic systems, which is interesting, right? For us, who that is common knowledge. But them understanding how those systems operate and how they're set up gives them the opportunity to come off of autopilot, right? So right from the get-go, we're looking at what is their energy level. Like, that is a go-to for me instantly on how fragmented they are, right? Headaches is often a symptom that their energetic system is off and they're dissociating. A lot of clients come in with what they call drop attacks or seizures that can't really be seen on an MRI. So, the headaches is definitely a thing to monitor as far as how their systems are working. Migraines are pretty typical as well. That is disharmony throughout those systems. Now, we're also teaching them and using their body as a mirror, and teaching them how to do that as well, right? So that they're not absorbing other people's stuff. A lot of people that are empaths end up with that hypochondriac kind of label because of their body mimicking, and they feel sick all the time. So they have to learn that right up front. And the exercises that we have in the hub are very helpful as far as them truly being able to exercise. And I tell people, I'm like, listen, like if you go and you break your arm, you go to physical therapy. This is your energetic therapy. Like you have to learn how to take ownership of these actions for life to change, right? So we're teaching them how to reclaim their body, right? We're tracking what parts of their body might be sluggish, right? Where the energy is moving slowly, usually hands and feet are cold, right? That means that they don't have, again, is a symptom of that level of fragmentation, I guess, and how much life force they have really circulating their body. We teach them how to set up their field, right? Because often spiritually people talk about making a bubble, and that idea of needing to create an external bubble means that that's like putting up a fence that you have to then defend and keep up, right? Your force field is your auric field, so you already have that. It's already a working system. It's just that we're not utilizing. Yeah. And if somebody is really struggling, one of the first things I'm going to do is make sure they can find the pulse in their toes. If they can't find the pulse in the toes, then they're not in their body. And number one, bring them in, right? Anxiety is these systems being out of alignment, right? Your car isn't going to run smooth if it is out of tune, right? You're going to hear static on a radio, right? If you don't have it tuned in. So through this whole process, we're bringing integrity throughout all these systems, which creates an inner peace unless something needs attention, right? The wisdom circuit is something these kids like unplugged a long time ago because they're very old souls. And they evolution wise were ahead of the members of their family, right? And it's hard to be a very wise 3-year-old who has better plans and strategies than the ones that are supposed to be the parents and grown-ups. Yeah, so that's a very difficult space. So unhooking the bottom portion of that circuit often happens very young. So these kids have like digestion problems, they have stomach aches, they have ulcers, they have all this dysfunction because that part of that chakra system is halted, right, or altered as well, right? And we're also evaluating like what is the depth of their skills, right? What is the level of their unconscious mastery, which is a cool place to be, right? It's a cool thing to watch that evolvement, right? We're also really like evaluating right up front where they are on the spectrum, right? Is the glass half empty or the glass half full, right? And is their perception matching their words, right? Are they walking around using a bunch of adjectives, glossing over really horrible feelings? Right? We have to evaluate that. They're not going to tell you that, right? That's us looking behind their words, being able to see their pictures, right? You know, once we can really be in control of our empathy skills, the skills of an empath, right? We can, I call it mind melding, right? Where I can tap in and see your pictures, right? So that's something that develops for you the more you're in this space. And if you can see their pictures, right, then you have the opportunity to see something that they're missing and bring harmony. Because when these systems, unless they're working in harmony, we're going to feel like different people, right? And we're not trustworthy. Now, spiritually, often people's lives aren't in harmony with their spiritual beliefs. And that causes guilt. And guilt is just like mold or bacteria, right? It serves no purpose. It just eats away at things. So recognizing, okay, what are their underlying beliefs, right? Now, it is amazing, right? I've worked with people who have grown up as Mormons or have grown up in these very fundamental religions and have evolved intellectually, right, through these and fundamentally through these thought processes. But much of their default is still anchored in those old beliefs and fears, right? So the reconciliation of these new thoughts and these old childlike beliefs is super important for them to be in integrity. So throughout this whole system, when we're jumping, we're creating harmony between the child's story and the grown-up story. Does that make sense? Right? That means they both have to like be using the same words, having the same beliefs, right? Being able to be unified be in unity over that experience, right? Now often, right, people are very afraid of the idea of God or the universe or spirit, whatever you want to call it, right? And, you know, you can hear in their words, they'll be like, hey, I'm a God-fearing person. And they'll be like, honey, okay, let's reframe that, right? Because to fear God is to fear you. And, you know, fear is having a respect for that power and a respect for energy, but to put fear and God side by side negates the whole thing, right? The universe is just going to cross that out. And we're taking that out of the idea column and bringing that into ownership. Being in the world and not of it means you're bringing that power here, and you have the ability to create change. You are the power. You are an integrity. We're judging where they are on that high level of sensitivity, on their level of empath, right? Because a lot of people like really are startled by touch and by lights and sound. And when you think, you know, you've got this highly sensitive, empathic child drop down in a world full of chaos and violence and sex, and it's loud, movements are unpredictable, food is unpredictable, what happens at dinner is unpredictable, right? And think about what their responses are going to be. I have a grandson that's super highly sensitive, and like his responses are like this, right? To everything. That's him naturally. He's never had trauma, right? Think if somebody was actually hitting him, he is going to respond to that very differently, right? I've got a daughter or a granddaughter that's super psychic, same thing. If she were dropped down in a place where people were questioning her perception and hitting her and violating her body, her perception of what she's seeing is going to be seen through a lens of fear. Often when I tap in with people with psychosis type diagnosis, you know, and I can see what they're seeing, if you change the words, it would be a completely different experience. Because a giant winged creature seen in the dark words and described with dark words could look like a demon. Yeah. Now, because of this level of attention, truly through all these layers of being, like this is what you're honing. You are honing your detective skills to be able to be aware of the details throughout all these systems all the time. Because of that, we can pull integrity and balance through these systems very rapidly, right? Really, when you think like 90 days is a really short time when you think about a lifetime of compounded trauma coming into balance, right? It's a very short time. And then when you think, okay, you know, the rest of the time is about learning, right? Learning how to live differently. And learning is different than healing. Wholeness is different than healing. Healing seems to never have an end, right? While things can only be so whole. So through that 90 days, we're creating balance and harmony and wholeness in a very molecular, tangible way, right? So that it is possible for someone to learn how to live differently, because there is nothing more disappointing or more frustrating than to be told what you're capable of, and to be told what's possible, and to be told what, you know, oh, somebody just, I'm putting you in your body. That's not possible. Nobody can put you in your body. right? Nobody can get in your body with you. I had a healer do that one time. I'm just going to get in there and hold you. And then I walk out feeling like a failure because I don't feel any different. So we have to recognize that we are measuring change for them every moment, right? It's not about what you think or feel. It's about what they're experiencing differently. So at the end of each session, I'm going to wind up with, so what feels different? That is multi-level purpose, because often people's perception is focused on what's the same. So this beautiful woman, you know, and some people can shift that very quickly, but the beautiful woman that was just here, right? In the beginning, her phrases or her reach out to me, although she was celebrating, would start out with, I have some of the same pain in my hip, and yet all the good stuff. And I'm like, so is it possible to leave that off and let's put all of our awareness and tension on the good stuff, and maybe that'll diminish. But right now you have the order where it's first in line. That means the most important. Right? So we start helping them bring balance into that. Have any questions?
Well, that was a phenomenal presentation, Cherie. I mean, very comprehensive, very, very thorough. I wanted to go back to the word psychosis that you used. Can you give us an example of one of your, I don't know what you call them, clients, I guess?
Well, you know, people that come in with those episodes are with those labels. I don't like to distinguish them out, but like, you know, often I don't believe in psychosis really. I believe they're seeing things, and the traditional world calls it that. Right. So I've had clients who, you know, were diagnosed with schizophrenia at a very young age. Right. And finally, one of his therapists realized he was actually seeing things, real things. And, you know, up until that point, they decided that that was an illness and said he was having psychotic episodes and declared him schizophrenic. And what's real and true is when I would tap in, I would be like, well, those are fearful words that you're putting around that experience. What if you use these words? That's not really a scary experience. I see it. See what I'm saying? So it's like often that happens with people with, as they bring their dreams forward as well, as like, you know, because I like to operate in that place because spirit talks very readily there because we're not interrupting. The interpretation of the dreams are as if they're nightmares, and what's real and true often is if you just look at them very literally, they're just very literal, right? Like if somebody said to me, like I had a dream that I was on this massive boat and it was sinking, right? And all of my family was jumping onto these boats and they left me off, right? I'd be like, okay, right? You know, and they're terrified. I'd be like, well, I think spirit's talking to you about like your life and the trajectory forward, and emotion is often water, and they're leaving you to drown in the emotion while they're getting on the boat. So maybe it's time for us to make a new and different choice.
Yeah, so I mean, in quantum therapeutics, as a practitioner, we travel through all the worlds.
Yes. I don't believe in imagination. That's a thought that as we're working with people, they'll like sometimes be like, well, how do I know that's not just my imagination? And, you know, so we make it very tactile when we're jumping people because of that, right?
So
And
they have to, before they jump, they have to feel.
in the jump, we want them to be able to touch the grass and feel it on their hands, to be able to touch the texture of the brick, be able to touch the trees, be able to like be there in a very tactile way. so that they can recognize that it's not just an idea, right? Because you can't touch in your imagination most often, right?
Yeah.
Or in an idea,
So
right?
they,
So I don't really believe in imagination, right?
that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't really believe in it. I believe that we're hopping either forward or back or into creation, right? So as we're taking them through, right, we're truly traveling them through time, right? And that's different than, than just sitting around thinking about something, right? We're there to create action and change.
Well, it's huge. I mean, it's taking all my creative processes to wrap my mind around it, because it's,
Yeah, so we'll be breaking it apart and breaking it apart, right? Because I know it's a very different way to look at it. And, if a person is super psychic and everything around them is horrible, their default bucket of words and their default perception is fear. So anytime we're looking at something through a lens of fear, it's going to be altered. Often as adults, we're operating like that, and that lens of fear is contaminating our experiences, right? Often psychics like that are amazing, but that lens of fear shadows their information they're getting.
so that they're afraid of their own power.
No, it's the words they use and how, and the information, just like you could read. So you could have 5 people in the room and they could all witness the same exact experience. And each person that walks away is going to use different words to portray that experience to the next person. Each one of those spokes of people is going to walk away with a different movie in their head. I could write a book about childhood or about psychic abilities and have it all be from the space of demons, or I could write that from the space of demons, depending on what words I choose to write the same experience. Because when I was looking at these creatures that this person was seeing, they were fairies and they saw little demons. Are they the same creatures? Yeah. Do fairies have wings? Yeah. Do little demons have wings? Yeah. And if there's no light shining, you can't tell the difference. As we're bringing them through this, it's amazing watching the light come in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Aristotle said it, he said that most people are sitting around a campfire inside a cave and looking at the shadows on the walls and in trying to interpret them, instead of turning to the cave door and stepping out into the light, into the sunshine.
It's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. They've known it all along, and it's really very simple. When we get in, you're going to realize. Sometimes people say to me, this can't be real, it's too simple. And I'm like, yeah, go back and study some of the amazing teachers. It really is simple.
When now that I am enrolled in the program and starting out and everything, do I have to go through with the entire level 1? Like, how long will that take? And when do I start to take practice clients? Like, how does that work for?
Level 1 is, trauma informed and really understanding the processes. You can work with people and practice anytime you want, right? But I'm going to make sure that you understand what you might crack open, as you move through. And you have to understand the quantum actions to be able to guide somebody into doing them. Right. So
Oh yeah, I'm
12
not
weeks
there.
is going to be a deep, comprehensive learning. Right. And the actions, if you've got friends that you can work with, you're more than welcome to work with them.
Okay.
And
Really?
well, I mean, I think that, that is your discretion, but I know that for myself, when I was studying different things, I was practicing on people. I think you'll know when that feels right, because
Yeah, I'm
I think it's
definitely not
super
ready right now.
important to really understand trauma and what you know, because some people will come in and they'll be like, well, I don't want to work with sexual abuse. And I said, well, like, then you might want to back away from trauma, because 1 in 3 people have sexual abuse.
Well, I definitely am all for a deep exploration of trauma, Cherie. I've experienced a number of different traumas,
I know you have.
including sexual abuse. So
I know you have. And, you know, the thing with this process is it cuts to the quick, very quick, you know. So we need to be, it's high level magic, and you need to know what you're doing. Like,
yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm not going to practice on anybody until I feel confident to know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Can I practice on my sisters when I'm ready?
Yeah, of course. So
Okay.
work with family, you want to make sure that you can stay in integrity through that and objective. I would wait a second. I would not do it right away, because
Oh,
we
no,
haven't
no,
even
no.
gotten to the magic part yet. But you know, um, I really want to dive into mental illness and sexual trauma so that we have kind of a foundation on how to approach those situations.